Okay, my name is Howard Eber and I am an alcoholic. Welcome to week 22 of the Big Book Comes Alive Step Study Workshop. We're going through the book word for word, line by line. We have covered the doctor's opinion where we talked about our being powerless, that we have a threefold malady made up of a spiritual malady where we are restless and irritable and discontented. We are raw nerves, everything hurts. And we eventually convince ourselves that we can safely take a drink or a drug, and that thought becomes so powerful, it becomes an obsession and overcomes all thoughts to the contrary. And so that mental component of our disease, the mental obsession, wins out. We take that drink or the drug, put it in our system, and that triggers the physical response, which is the craving. So we have a mental obsession, a spiritual malady, which leads us to the mental obsession, which leads us to the physical malady, the physical allergy. And we're not totally screwed because we are told that in the second step, there is a solution. And we talked about that in the second chapter, aptly entitled, There is a Solution, which is spiritual in nature. And I could practically see Bill Wilson sitting and thinking after he wrote that chapter that, there are still going to be some people who are a little iffy about this God concept. So I'm going to write a chapter about what happens if you don't seek a spiritual solution. And he wrote more about alcoholism, focusing on one thing and one thing only: the insanity that precedes the first drink, where we go from stone cold sober, absolutely sane, sane meaning believing in the truth. Sanity is defined as the ability to recognize the truth in all matters. And if we make a decision to take a drink or a drug, knowing what happens every time we do it, then we have crossed the line into believing in a lie. We make a decision based on a lie, in which case we are insane, because insanity is belief in a lie. So this chapter is all about, and Bill, being a great teacher, gives us some examples. He's going to give us 4 examples of people who crossed over at one point or another because they believed in a lie and they thought they could find another easier, softer way. And what we're going to do in telling these stories is try and identify the point at which they crossed over. And what was the lie they told themselves? What was the untruth that they told themselves that gave them the thought to take that drink or drug, knowing what would happen, that triggers the allergy? And we already went through one story, the man of 30.
That's my favorite.
Oops, let's mute everyone again. Sorry about that. Who knew he had a problem with alcohol. He knew that if he continued drinking, he wouldn't get anywhere at all. And his drive for success was enormous. So he stopped drinking for 25 years. He retired. Out came the slippers and the bottle. And within 4 or 5 years, he drank himself to death. That he had believed the lie that if after a period of time, that he believed that after a period of sobriety, of forced abstinence, really, not sobriety, it's forced abstinence, it's sobriety, that one could drink safely again. And he was dead within 4 to 5 years. That's the first story we had. And we're about to approach a second story. We are in more about alcoholism, obviously. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned the title already. And we're on page 34. Just a couple of important points. In the previous page, on page 33, in reference to that first story, the man of 30, Bill says this case contains a powerful lesson. That powerful lesson is the truth. And in that paragraph that starts with "this case contains a powerful lesson," he tells us that once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Once a pickle, never a cucumber. that the belief that commencing to drink after a period of sobriety, we are in short time as bad as ever. And if we're planning to stop drinking, there must be no reservation of any kind, nor any lurking notion that someday we will be immune to alcohol. No must. In this book, we circle all of the musts in green, and there's a must in that sentence. And he says, no must, there must be no reservation. You know, we use a lot of language in these rooms and don't always explain it. And if you're new and not sure what a reservation is just a doubt, some condition, some limiting condition that we place on our sobriety where we hold back for some reason. For example, if I ever had to make a speech in front of a group of people, I'm going to have to get drunk. I'm going to have a few drinks. If I ever have to go to a job interview, I know I'm going to have a few drinks. Those are reservations, and those reservations are lies. Whatever we tell ourselves that gives us that thought that we can do this safely is a lie. So on page 34, we are going to start with the last paragraph, but I want to go back to the middle of the page and start with that previous paragraph that says, for those who are unable to drink moderately. I'll give you a moment to find that right in the middle of page 34. For those who are unable to drink moderately, the question is how to stop altogether. And that sentence should be highlighted, and how to stop altogether should be underlined. And if you're like me, you were as perplexed as I was when I first read that, because I've read the previous 33 pages. I get the point. You're trying to let me know I am powerless over alcohol, that I have lost the power to choose. I've lost the power of choice in alcohol. I cannot choose to stop once I start because of the physical allergy. And I cannot choose not to start once I've stopped because of the mental obsession. So I've lost the power of choice. It's not about what I drink, how often I drink, the consequences of my drinking. I am an alcoholic because of my relationship to alcohol in terms of power, choice, and control. I don't have any of that. So when you tell me I have to stop altogether, I have to wonder, how are you expecting me to do that? You told me I can't regulate. I can't not stop. So what do I do? Well, he tells us. He said, we're assuming, of course, that the reader desires to stop. That desire, incidentally, is the entire basis. That assumption is the entire basis upon which this book is written. That's the assumption made when this book was written, that the reader desires to stop. Whether a person can quit upon a non-spiritual basis, please underline non-spiritual basis. That is a change. Up until now, Bill has been using the term beyond human control. And since we're now getting into that second step where we're going to talk about God, we have to now start to talk in terms of spiritual things, not religious, spiritual. Religions are a set of practices. If you want to join our club, worship our imaginary best friend, these are the things you have to do. You have to pray like this, eat like this, dress like this, etc. We're not talking about that. We're talking about spirituality. And spirituality is a set of disciplines. The disciplines for God, for prayer, for meditation are all defined by the individual. That your conception of God is different than mine, is different than Brandon's, is different than Mark's, is different than Tom's, is different than Randy's. We all have our own conception of God. That is spirituality, and that's what we're talking about here. Religions make some very harsh terms in being part of their club. Spirituality makes no harsh terms. It's God, it's prayer, it's meditation as you define it. So whether we can stop on a non-spiritual basis is just going to meetings, incidentally, because meetings are human. Those are human methods. They're inadequate higher powers. Relying upon a group as our higher power is an unreliable higher power. Why? Well, for one thing, you're not always there. When that meeting ends and you get your hour of relief and you hit that door and the air comes at you and the world is on you, what happens then? What do? You turn around, run back into the meeting and wait for the next one to start. Not a very viable way to live. But here's another one I got for you. If your concept of God is your home group, how did you feel when you were denied access to that? Think back. COVID, when we were denied access, we could not go to our home groups. When you were told you can't get to your higher power, what did you do then? It is an unreliable higher power. And that's what we're talking about. Methods like that. So we need a spiritual basis upon which we can recover. So he says whether we can quit on a non-spiritual basis depends upon the extent to which he's already lost the power to choose whether he can drink or not. And once again, we've lost the power to choose to stop once we start because of the allergy. We've lost the power to choose. Someone's asking where we're at. We're on page 34, paragraph 2. And we've lost the power to choose not to start because of the mental obsession. So many of us felt that we had plenty of character. Yeah, there's plenty of characters here. There's 151 characters in this room right now. But I think what he means when he says we have plenty of character is we have a moral code. We all have a sense of right and wrong. We all have some morality. We all have some sense of truth and right and wrong. And that's what he's referring to here, that many of us felt that we had plenty of character. We had that strong moral code. There was a tremendous urge to cease forever, yet we found it impossible. Two very strong terms: cease forever, impossible. And here is, as I mentioned last week, what Kathy refers to as the best definition of alcoholism I've ever heard, and I agree. Here it is. This is the baffling feature of alcoholism as we know it, this utter inability to leave it alone, no matter how great the necessity or wish. That is alcoholism defined. The utter inability to leave it alone, no matter how great the wish, no matter how great the need, the utter inability to leave it alone. Anyone agree? You bet. You bet. Okay. So how then shall we help our readers determine to their own satisfaction? You may want to underline to their own satisfaction, because you have to convince us first whether they are one of us. In other words, real alcoholics. One of us is real alcoholics. Anytime I see the terms real alcoholics in this book, I always write A/O over it, which means allergy/obsession. And I do that to remind myself that they're talking about me. If I don't do that, I can convince myself he's talking about someone else. Oh, he's talking about me. He's talking about Paul, or he's talking about Michael, or he's talking about Mary, but he's not talking about me. So I make sure I understand he's talking about me. I put it in terms that I could understand, the allergy and the obsession. I've got it. So it must be me. Whether they are one of us, the experiment of quitting for a period of time will be helpful, but we think we can render an even greater service to alcoholic sufferers and perhaps to the medical fraternity. So we shall describe some of the please highlight the rest of this paragraph. Mental states which precede a relapse into drinking, for obviously this is the crux of the problem. That is such a heavy sentence. Let me go back through it. We are going to describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse. The mental state that precedes the relapse is that mental obsession. The state that precedes the relapse is the thinking that tells us this time it'll be different. That precedes the relapse. Okay, there we go. We're good. Okay. So we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking, for obviously this is the crux of the problem. The crux is another way of saying the core. The core of the problem, the heart of the problem is not that we have a physical allergy. The heart of the problem is that we have a mental obsession that tells us we don't have a physical allergy. That's the problem. The thinking, not the body's reaction. That is the crux of the problem. That is the heart of the problem, the insanity of that first drink. And what sort of thinking dominates an alcoholic who repeats time after time the desperate experiment of the first drink? Please highlight that. Now let's kind of pause for a second. The first story, the man of 30, let's remember that the man of 30 made a conscious decision to resume drinking, and the result was fatal, right? But what about the guy who has every intention to never drink again, yet does? That's not the man of 30. The man of 30, as I said, made a conscious decision to drink after a period of time. But what about the person who knows he has a problem, who decides he's not going to do it again? What about that guy? Well, that's what we're talking about here. What type of thinking dominates the alcoholic? Thinking is an interesting word. Thinking means my ability to reason. That's basically what thinking means, is my ability to reason, which for us is broken. Our thinking system is broken down. So what sort of thinking dominates an alcoholic who repeats time after time? The desperate, and desperate means life-threatening. The life-threatening experiment of the first drink. An experiment is defined as an action undertaken to demonstrate or prove something. An action undertaken to demonstrate or prove something. So what is the action we're undertaking in that first drink? What are we trying to prove? That we can stop after one or stop after two or whatever lie we told ourselves. That the man of 30 told himself that after a period of not drinking 25 years, he could safely drink again. That was the lie he told himself. That was the experiment that he was trying to prove. So, what about the desperate experiment of the first drink? Friends who have reasoned with him after a spree which has brought him to the point of divorce or bankruptcy are mystified when he walks directly into a saloon. Why does he? Of what is he thinking? Once again, thinking. Thinking is defined as our ability to reason, and for us, that is broken. Our first example is a friend we shall call Jim. So let's get some of the biographical details out of the way. Jim is in all likelihood a gentleman by the name of Ralph Furlong. Ralph's story was in the first edition. It was called Another Prodigal Story. It was dropped by the second edition. It is, if you want to read his story, it's in a book called Experience, Strength, and Hope, which is made up of all of the stories that were ever in the book that for whatever reason were taken out. They don't disappear. They have just moved from the big book to the Experience, Strength, and Hope book. So if you'd like to read his story, it's in the experience, strength, and hope. Let's take a look at, I think we have some, no, all I have is the picture of Ralph Furlong. Andy, you want to take a look at 315? This is the best I could come up with for a picture of Ralph Furlong. It was in his obituary, but it's better than nothing. I didn't have it the last cycle, but we do have it now. Furlong is his name. There he is. This is the picture that was used in his obituary. That is Jim, the car salesman. Okay. All right. So let's get back to the story. Jim, this man has a charming wife and family. He inherited a lucrative automobile business. Please underline inherited. Inherited means he did nothing to earn that. He got it by birth. His father built that business. I spent until I retired 40 some odd years in the car business. I know a lot of what we call dealer brats who are the firstborn of the man who built the business, the man who did every job in the business, who hands the keys to his son. His son has never changed the oil in the car. His son has never sold the car. His son has never done anything in terms of sales or parts or service. He's just handed the business. And it was a lucrative business. It was a successful business. He was handed that by his father. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody in the car business are dealer brats, incidentally. I also worked for a lot of guys who were the son of owners, but their father made them learn the business. They started out in the cleanup area, cleaning up cars when they came in for a service or when they were being delivered to customers. They then went into the grease pit to learn how to do lube oil and filters on cars, and then learned how to be a service advisor, and then learned how to be a service director, and then had to learn how to sell cars. They worked their way up in the system. That is not Jim. Jim was just handed the keys. Here it is, son. So he inherited a lucrative business. He had a commendable World War record. He's a good salesman. Everybody likes him. He's an intelligent man. Please underline this. Normal so far as we can see. So far as we can see. That's an important statement, an important reference, because appearances are not inward reality at all. Remember, we were already told that outward appearances don't always match up. We're going to see that in some of the other stories that we're going to read in this chapter. But the front, he's presenting a front, and to the front, he seems like a normal guy, except for a nervous disposition. Underline, please. In the underline nervous disposition, and above it, I wrote RID, restless, irritable, discontent. There's a lot of nervous people in this chapter. The man of 30 was nervous too, because of his, when he would wake up the morning after a spree. Let's see what it says. They're trying to do a couple together. Well, I'm not going to waste any more of your time with that, but there is a reference that, oh, he's an exceptional mind, except when he's, boy, I'm lost here. Once he started, he had no control, made up his mind, he would not touch another drop, another man. There is a reference to, oh, I'm sorry, a man of 30 was doing a great deal of spree drinking. He was very nervous. I'm so sorry for taking the time to find that for you, but he was very nervous in the morning after those bouts. He was nervous, and over nervous there, we said restless, irritable, and discontented. So now we got another guy who's got a nervous disposition. He did no drinking until he was 35. In a few years, and underline few years, please, He became so violent when intoxicated, he had to be committed. On leaving the asylum, on leaving the rehab, when was the last time you heard someone say, I just got out of the asylum? No, we call them rehabs, we call them detoxes. In coming out of the asylum, please highlight in blue, he came into contact with us. I highlight that in blue because as we go through the book, we're going to try and isolate the times and build George's reference to approach, to making the approach to the person who's struggling or new. Somehow in today's culture, it became acceptable to sit back and take the attitude of being available. Well, that's not what this book tells me to do. The book tells me it's my job to approach the person who's struggling. And that's what happened here. Upon coming out of the asylum, he started going to meetings and he came in contact with us. The man of 30 didn't have any meetings to go to. This guy does. So he started going to meetings. He came in contact with us. We told him what we knew about alcoholism. Please underline what we knew about alcoholism, and above it, write step 1. We told them about the allergy. We told them about the obsession. We told them about the spiritual malady. That's what we knew about alcoholism. Step 1, we told them about it. First part of step 1, admitted we were powerless over alcohol, means I can't handle alcohol. Dash, that my life had become unmanageable, which means I can't handle sobriety either. That's what they told him about alcoholism. And the answer we had found, please underline answer they had found, right? Step 2. So they told him about the allergy. They told him, but good news, Jim, there is a solution. There is a way out here. He made a beginning. Please highlight and underline that. He made a beginning, which in the context of this book, in most likelihood, all likelihood means he made the third step decision. He made a beginning. Later, when we get into how it works, and Bill talks about, gives us the instructions for the third step, he says the third step is but a beginning. So in line with that thinking, when I hear him say here, he made a beginning, he uttered the words, whatever they were in those days, because they didn't have the third step as we have it today. But he made a decision. I'm going to go through this plan of action that you guys have. The Oxford group had their plan of action. We have ours called the steps. So whatever they had in those days, he made a decision. I'm going to do that. Okay? He made a beginning. His family was reassembled. He began to work as a salesman for the business he had lost through his drinking. Please underline that. The business he had lost through his drinking. Can you imagine what that does to one's ego? Like I said, I spent my life in the car business, and I can't imagine being a salesman and having to work for somebody I hired when I owned the store. I've had 1 or 2 situations where I almost had to go to work as a salesman under somebody I hired as a salesman who now has the job ahead of me. That was depressing enough. I could not imagine going to work in a dealership I owned. I trained this guy. I hired this guy. And now I have to call him boss. Can you imagine what that does?
Yeah, that's a dose of humility, humble pie.
Humble pie. That's it. Okay. So for the business he lost through his drinking, all went well for a while. Please highlight and underline, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life.
You always know when it says all went well for a while, it's not going to stay very well.
Right. There's a shitstorm coming. But please, where we underlined and highlighted, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. Next to that, please write, see page 14, last line. Because When he fails to enlarge his spiritual life, that's telling us something. At the bottom of page 14 is what it tells us. If an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through going to meetings and taking commitments, right? No. Through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. Certain trials and low spots. Certain means absolute, means it's going to happen. It's for certain. There are going to be trials and low spots. There are going to be life's vicissitudes. There are going to be, as Bill called it in his story, worldly clamors. The shitstorm of everyday life, that safe is going to drop on you at some point. And that's what we're talking about. If we don't perfect and enlarge our spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others.
Especially if we're going through that, we need to not deviate away from working with others. We need to go harder at working with others.
Yeah. Especially when life is not going the way we want it. Working with others solves all of those problems. Not just when we feel good. As Kathy mentioned, especially when we don't.
That's exactly like with us. Like when I was going through a hard time, Howard just was like throwing himself the more into working with others and vice versa.
Mhm.
Like it's our way of living.
That's it. So back to page 35. So all went well for a while, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. And we know what happens now. To his consternation, and consternation just means amazed terror. It's not just amazement, it's amazed terror. So to his amazement, to his terror, he found himself drunk, underline this please, half a dozen times in rapid succession. That's 6 times. 6 times. For those of you who might have missed that day in school, I did.
Just think of eggs, like a small thing of
That's
eggs.
right. Small
6.
thing of eggs, half a dozen eggs. So he found himself drunk 6 times in rapid succession. Rapid succession, above that, right? Progression. The progression. Whether he's drinking or not, he wasn't drinking. And he started drinking after a period of abstinence. And his body reacted as if it had been drinking every day that he wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
It made my head spin when I picked up after 10 years. And my body reacted as if I'd been using every one of those days of the 10 years that I wasn't. It made my head spin.
I don't know about anyone else, if anyone else relapsed in their story, but I remember like it talks about it in the first page. When I went out, I thought I was able to control it. The first night wasn't that bad, but the second night, like Howard talked about, the progression just pulled me in quicker than I could realize. It's such a progressive.
Yeah, what we need in terms of dosage, regularity, it's amazing, but it's as if we had never stopped. Okay, so he found himself drunk 6 times in rapid succession. On each of these occasions, we worked with him. Please highlight, we worked with him in blue. That's made the approach. They approached him.
They didn't say, well, you didn't want it enough, Jim,
Right.
did they? They didn't say, call me when you're ready. No.
Yeah. They didn't say that guy don't want it enough. When he wants it, he'll come to us. It's not what they did. They went to him. These are good AAers. Reviewing carefully what had happened. Please highlight this first phrase. He agreed he was a real alcoholic, and above real alcoholic, as I said, A/O, allergy and obsession. He acknowledged he's one of us. So he agreed he was a real alcoholic and in serious condition. He knew he faced another trip to the asylum. He knew it. That's what he knew about the consequences of his drinking. There are 2 consequences he's going to talk about here. The first consequence of his drinking is another trip to the rehab. Above asylum, I just wrote rehab because that's what we call them. So he knew the consequences of his drinking are twofold. One, he's going to wind up back in the booby hatch. He did. Moreover, number two, he would lose his family for whom he had a deep affection. So he knew what would happen, yet he drank. Self-knowledge failed. How do I know it's self-knowledge? Because he never did anything to enlarge his spiritual life.
Well, he didn't want to do it, and he
Right.
could not do it, even for his family.
Right. He
So
couldn't not do it. Exactly.
Yeah, he drank again.
Yet he got drunk again. And let's highlight and underline that. That's the seventh time. For those of you who are counting, Bert, I think you may want to make note. That's the seventh time. If he got drunk 6 times in rapid succession, that's 6 times. He is number 7. Just who those of you who are keeping score. He got drunk again. We asked him, and I've highlighted those 3 words in blue because it's a reference to approach. Now, they may be getting a little tired of Jim now, but they haven't given up. These are good AAers. None of them are sitting back and saying, he's a constant relapser. He doesn't want it enough. All of the nonsense you hear at meetings today about people who relapse a lot. Oh, he don't want it enough. He's not desperate enough. He has no control. Okay? So we asked him to tell us exactly what happened. This is his story. Interesting choice of words. They said they want to know exactly what happened. Did they get exactly what happened? No. You ask an alcoholic to tell us exactly what happened, and you're going to get a story. And that's what they got. They got a story. You ask us what happened, you're going to get a story. We're not going to just tell you what happened. There's a story. You got to understand this was going on at the beginning, and I got pissed off, and I did this, and I got to explain everything. The story, the rationalization, and the justification come as part of the story. So we tell him, tell us what happened. This is his story. I came to work on Tuesday morning. Anyone catch that?
Yes.
I read this for 24 years and I missed that.
Maybe he had a doctor's appointment.
Yeah. What happened to Monday? Maybe he had a doctor's appointment. Yeah. Somebody once at one of our workshops said maybe he had the day off.
Exactly.
Well, I can tell you, being in the car business, no car salesman has Monday off because dealerships are, for the most part, closed Sunday. That means they'd have 2 days off, and the only people who get 2 days off are the owners of the dealership.
Maybe it was a bank holiday.
Yeah, maybe it was a bank holiday. In any case, what happened to Monday? Nobody says anything. He shows up Tuesday. I remember I felt irritated. Highlight, please, irritated, and above it, right, resentful. I felt resentful. Here it is. It's starting to come up to the surface that I had to be a salesman for a concern I once owned. Oof. That had to be tough. Every time he walked into work, he's reminded of that. I own this joint and I drank it away. I didn't lose it in bad business decisions. I drank it away. So I remember feeling irritated. I had to be a salesman for a concern I once earned. I had a few words with the boss, but nothing serious. I bet those words began with, "Gee, Jim, where were you yesterday?" Right? Just a few words. Where were you? No phone call, no text, no Pony Express, no smoke signal, nothing. You don't tell us
But
a word.
anything with the word with the boss is not a good idea.
Yeah, that's another point.
Really.
Anytime you have a word with the boss, it's usually not a good idea. Whenever I heard Howard come into my office, oh, The only thing worse than Howard coming into my office is being told to close the door when I came in. Oh, forget it. I'll just start packing now. You don't have to say a word. I got the breakout box under my desk. I'll just load it up and get out of here. Not a good thing when the boss says, I need to have a word with you. So he had a word with the boss, right? Nothing serious.
Ooh.
And above nothing serious, I wrote just irritating. Irritating. Where were you yesterday, my man? No phone call, nothing. So then I decided to drive into the country and see one of my prospects for a car. Now, to put this in perspective, in those days, it wasn't unusual to sell a car by going to the customer, very much like people do with insurance today. They come to your house. Well, they used to. In the car business today, most times people come into the showroom, or now with the internet being what it is, work through the internet. But the point is, it wasn't unusual for him to take the keys to a car and go try and sell it to someone. He wasn't just saying, to hell with it, I'm going out for a ride. Um, so, on the way, I felt hungry. So I stopped at a roadside place where they have a bar. Now, if we're going to trace his journey from sane to insane, let's go over these facts here. So far, so good. Now, there's a school of thought that says the moment he decided to pull into this place to have a sandwich, that's when the drunk began. Maybe, maybe not. He's been there before. I think anytime if you're trying to stay sober, newly sober, it's a bad idea, no matter how many times you've been there before when you were not drinking, to go to a place that serves alcohol. You want a sandwich? Go to a good Jewish deli. The greatest.
No, but honestly, I heard this before back in the day that was very common to have bars at roadside
Yeah.
places.
Mhm.
So
Wasn't unusual. So far, so good. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. So far, so good, right? On a roadside place where they had a bar. Please highlight and underline, I had no intention of drinking. So he's consciously, there aren't any thoughts about drinking. I just thought I'd get a sandwich. Still sane. I also had the notion I might find a customer for a car at this place, which was familiar, for I'd been going to it for years. So far, so good. But there is a school of thought that says this is all rationalization. This is all rationalizing and justifying going into a place where he shouldn't be if he's newly sober. But be
Yeah.
that,
yeah.
yep. I had eaten there many times during the months I was sober. Months he was abstinent. I don't know about sober. I don't think he ever achieved sobriety. He achieved sobriety. Remember, they told him what they knew about alcohol and the solution, and he made a decision but never took action. So he made a resolution. We talked about this last week, making a resolution versus making a decision. A resolution isn't followed by action. A decision is followed by action. So he made a resolution. I sat down at a table, ordered a sandwich and a glass of milk. So far, so good, right? Still no thought. Underline that, please. Still no thought of drinking. Still hungry. So I decided to order another sandwich and another glass of milk. So far, so good, right?
No.
Suddenly, the thought crossed my mind, if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach. Absolute nonsense. disgusting
Who
too.
has had the thought here of like when it's Christmas time and they have like Baileys for their coffee that, oh, that looks lovely. And then you remember you're an alcoholic when you watch it on TV. I've had that thought. So I understand him,
Yep.
but I don't have a compulsion to do that.
Suddenly the thought crossed my mind. Suddenly is the sound made by the obsession when it strikes. The obsession of the mind, when it strikes us, it sounds sudden. So suddenly, and this is all italicized, so it must be important. It must be important here. His disease came knocking in the form of an idea. Gee, if I put the whiskey in the milk, it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach.
I'm sorry, but that is disgusting.
It is disgusting.
Like, why would he be eating a sandwich?
Yeah.
You don't eat the sandwich.
After 7 relapses, right? Why? First of all, you have to wonder if you're not going to get the desired result, which is the buzz on a full stomach with milk, why do it?
Because he's insane.
He's insane. He's not seeing the truth. He's believing in his lies. So he orders a glass of milk. I'm sorry. So I ordered a whiskey and poured it in the milk. The thought turns into an action. All action is preceded by thought. I don't want to start a whole discussion on this because there are a lot of people who say that you can think your way, you could act your way into good thinking. I'm sorry. You can't act your way into good thinking because all action is based on thought. So if you're saying, I'm going to act my way into good thinking, that's based on your having an idea that if I act a certain way, it'll change my thinking. It still starts up here with an idea. Okay, so he has an idea. I can put the milk, alcohol in the milk, and it won't hurt me. So he does it. I ordered a whiskey and poured it in the milk. I vaguely sensed, please underline vaguely. And above that, I wrote gut feeling. Do you ever have that? That knot in your stomach and oops, I don't think that was a good idea.
Yeah, you know when you're about to do it. You feel
Yeah.
you're going to be sick or you got the cold sweats
That's
or you're
it.
paranoid. Who's
Mhm.
around me? Yeah.
Yeah. Gut feeling. I vaguely sensed, in a couple of pages, we're going to read that deep down in every man, woman, and child is a fundamental concept of God, whether you call it your gut feeling, whether you call it innate intelligence. That's what he's talking about. That feeling of God in his stomach is saying, whoops, that was not a good idea. Vaguely sensed I was not being any too smart, but felt reassured. Let's underline felt reassured. That inner voice, the devil over here, the other voice over here. One side, I think that's a mistake. The other side, don't listen to him. It's okay. You had the one drink. You're not fall down drunk. Go have another. Well, I felt reassured as I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach. And let's highlight the rest of the paragraph. The experiment went so well, and I added a word there, the desperate experiment went so well that I ordered another whiskey, poured it into more milk. That didn't seem to bother me, so I ordered another and another and another and another. Clearly, Jim has a milk problem, right? He's got to stay away from milk. Milk is causing all of his problems, right? So, thus started one more journey to the rehab for Jim. Still calling it asylum, to the rehab for Jim. Here was, and again, let's look at those things he was going to lose. Here was one, the thought of commitment, the threat of commitment. right? On the previous page, he knew he faced another trip to the rehab. Reason number one, he knew that. Number two, the loss of family and position. To say nothing, and let's highlight this, of the intense mental and physical suffering which drinking always caused him. Always. You may want to underline always a few times. Always caused him. In other words, self-knowledge was insufficient. He knew these things were going to happen. He knew what was going to happen every time he drank. He knew that he would lose his family. He knew that he'd wind up back in the booby hatch. And he knew that every time he drank, it caused him great mental and physical suffering. Yet he drank again. The obsession makes us drink. The allergy makes us drunk. Or as Dr. Silkworth says, it's the obsession that condemns us to drink, and it's the allergy that condemns us to die. So once again, point being, self-knowledge, knowing all of those things, didn't stop him. Self-knowledge is an inadequate higher power. If we think, as we keep score as we're going through this book, self-knowledge has already proved itself to be an inadequate, insufficient higher power. What other ones have we come across? Well, in the doctor's opinion,
Fear.
we were told about frothy emotional appeals. Those are insufficient, inadequate higher powers. When your family pleads with you, worked for me for a period of time, but then when everything calmed down and dad seemed to mellow out, boom, I go right back to what I was doing before. So frothy emotional appeals is an insufficient, inadequate higher power. What's another one? Fear. In Bill's story, he says fear sobered him for a bit. So that means it worked for a little while, but it's not a permanent solution. It's an inadequate, insufficient higher power. And now we have self-knowledge, which was present in these other examples as well. So self-knowledge failed. So, squiggly writing must be important.
Can you go back step by step from the moment he went from sane to insane?
Sure. Well,
I think that would be great.
let's identify that. What point at which did he cross over? Right? He decided to go for a ride. So far, so good. He decided to go into the place for a sandwich. Okay. He went in. He ordered a sandwich and milk. Okay. Then the thought occurred. Suddenly, there's where he crossed the line into being insane. So if we want to identify the point at which Jim separated reality and unreality, the lie and truth, there it is. When he thought, I could safely take that milk with the alcohol on an empty stomach.
He went insane.
He went insane. We don't always think of it in those terms, but that's exactly what it is. Insanity is belief in a lie. Okay. He had much knowledge, all this squiggly writing here, so it must be important. He had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic. Yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside. I want to go back to the previous page for a minute. If you count them, the word that the word I is used 26 times on this page alone. 26 times. And I think that's Bill's way of telling us that I is an insufficient higher power. Simple. Okay, let's continue. Yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if he mixed it with milk. Let's break that down a little bit. The idea, he said, that the reasons for drinking were easily pushed aside. There's a great explanation for what an obsession does. An obsession pushes aside all the reasons for not doing it.
Also, reason is from our mind. It's from our thinking and the main
Mhm.
problem centers in our mind. So there's never going to be a reason to
There you
keep
go.
us sober.
Yeah. Get the reason. Reason comes from our mind. So these ideas were easily pushed aside. In other words, the obsession takes hold. It pushes out of our mind all of the things that we know are going to happen in favor of the foolish idea. And what is the foolish idea that Jim had? That he could take a drink if he had it in milk. That was a foolish, stupid, disgusting, insane idea.
I hope no one here in their past life liked milking whiskey. Sorry, I don't mean to be offensive.
Whatever, let's highlight incidentally this whole next paragraph. It's only 4 lines long, but we're gonna highlight that. Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. It's a great definition of insanity coming up here. How can such a lack of proportion, insanity, lack of proportion, the inability to see things as they are, that's lack of proportion. Things seem different through the lens of insanity. So we call this plain insanity. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight? Please underline ability to think straight. What is ability to think straight? See the truth. See the truth. If you're thinking straight, you're seeing the truth. He's not seeing the truth. And so he says, how can it be called anything else? Great explanation of insanity. Let's just finish this last paragraph and then we can wrap for the day. Oh, it's time. All right, let's call it, let's stop it right there.